I'm a wet wipe guy myself, you know what I'm saying?
Shameless plug. Are you getting paid to say that?
No, but Dude Wipes, you can sponsor the podcast, by the way.
Let's say, speak it to existence.
Welcome to the Daru Strong Podcast. Daru Strong Podcast.
Let's go. Mind over matter. Put your mind somewhere else and keep going. That little voice in your head is trying to stop you from getting to where you want to be. Be successful and keep moving forward.
With your host and world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, Phil Daru.
My man, Nick. Thanks again for joining me, bro.
Always.
All right, so what we want to talk about today is, your background is psychology, correct? What was your full background and what you got your degrees in?
So first was general psychology. So every undergrad who has a psychology degree, you learn a little bit of everything, the cognitive, personality, clinical. But once you graduate, you pick a specific route. So I chose to do sports psychology. Originally I was going to do clinical, but I wanted it to be more applied and practical, like how do we perform better in real time versus, therapy and treating disorders, which definitely is a good lane to have, but I wasn't too sure, so I chose to go more to the performance-based side. And then eventually I got back to it with the clinical years later for a doctorate, which I didn't finish, and we talked about a little bit in neuropsych, so being able to diagnose disorders from a more neurological aspect, so ADHD, autism, Parkinson's, things like that. So I dabbled in a little bit of everything. So
how long did that take you to really grasp that concept of why this is so important?
I guess deep down, even when we played together, I always thought there's more to it than the physical. Obviously, being good at just life is great, but you have to understand what goes into that from a cognitive, psychological aspect to know what behaviors, what traits make you a better person regardless of your demographic. So I was like, how can I get more knowledgeable about that and understand how these behaviors can help us perform?
So talking about that, when you look, because we're both coaches, we both work with athletes, we work with people in general now from all walks of life. And I've found that this is something that's such an underlining factor and an X factor in a sense when it comes down to performance and getting what you need out of a person, right? So talk a bit about like personality traits. We're going to talk, the different testing that you can do. There's several different testing, the ones that are good, ones that suck, but let's go off of that. What is personalities? What are personality traits that people have, and how can that correlate over into performance training?
That's a good question. So just start with what personality is, because a lot of people, they say, oh, they have a nice personality. What does that truly mean? So personality is just simply a scientific way of measuring how we behave and describing it. So one big question I get told and asked all the time is, can it change? So yes and no. Because obviously we can change as people, but one of my mentors is named Dr. Ryan Sherman, and I've done a study with him. We put out on mental toughness and personality, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, look at it as like your dominant hand, right? So let's say you're a very agreeable person, so we'll talk more about that later, but say you're higher in agreeableness, cooperation and stuff, doesn't mean you can't step up and be a leader, but just like your handedness, if you're right-handed, you obviously can do things with your left hand, whether it be picking something up or drive, whatever. Okay. But you're always gonna have that default mode, and that's how personality kind of is. Like, if I can be more aggressive and a leader, yes, but more than likely if I'm more agreeable, I'm gonna fall back in that more passive cooperational role by default. So that's how we look at personality, something that can give us some kind of constant, because it typically stays pretty constant throughout life. You can always change behaviors, but the personality itself is going to be your default of who you are.
So is that going to be based off of their opportunities in their job description? Is that like, okay, I need to change the way I think, I need to change my personality? Let's say, for instance, you got a lot of people that are introverted at heart, but they need to be extroverted in order to get a promotion or speak at a large event, right? They need to have that ability. I feel like I have that ability in some cases, right? I don't want to say introvert. I think I play both sides of the fence, and there's plenty of people that have that. But there's people that are truly introverted, and they have to do extroverted things.
Of course. So that goes back to what I said, because yes, you do have to step up in different situations. There's a time where an introverted person got to be on the scene or got to speak up, and there's going to be times where an extroverted person has to calm down. But with what we'll talk about, I guess, more with trait theory versus types, is that it's more so how do you adapt and adjust in those situations more so than are you this or that. It's more so, okay, if I am extroverted, that means when I'm in a situation that calls for more being on the scene, talking, being social, I adapt easier. versus introverted. Yes, you can adapt, but you got to put a little more effort into it. And you might feel a little more drained. Like I know personally, we're very similar. I can speak in front of people all the time too, but I know for a fact if I know I have a lot of social things to do, after I'm done, I'm chilling. I don't want to talk to nobody.
You ain't going to no after party.
You feel me? And that's really what it is. So people get caught up in am I this or that versus like how do I adapt and adjust throughout whatever scenarios.
This episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep. Now, 8 Sleep is a company that has been gracious enough to lend me and give me a bed to actually sleep on that is going to increase my quality of sleep overall. Me and my wife have loved this bed, and we must say that it has honestly been a game changer, not only for our ability to sleep better, but also our ability to perform when we wake up. Their mission is fueling human potential through optimal sleep, using innovative technology and personal biometrics. They're not just a bed or a bed company, it's a health and wellness company focused on sleep itself. Now that pod that I was talking about, they've been graciously giving me, is redefining the entire experience of sleep, leveraging data and technology to improve overall health and wellness in a way that no other company is currently doing. Now, in essence, they are a health and wellness company that is focused on sleep. Now, the app is where all the magic happens. That's where you're going to track your data. That's where you're going to track your sleep quality, and that's going to enhance your abilities to program yourself and program your athletes if you want to do so, if you are a coach. You can view your sleep and health metrics. You can adjust your temperature. You get insights. It personalizes your sleep experience. The pod is a sensor layer that tracks and improves your sleep by dynamically heating or cooling temperatures of your base of the bed. And it'll get better every night because you'll constantly be using it, and it'll start to track and understand your body. And you can integrate it into whatever health tracker you're using at the moment. Now, if you want to get your hands on one, just go to 8sleep.com. That's 8 spelled out sleep.com, and let them know that I sent you. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Let's talk about you have the Myers-Briggs, right, which is, some people like it, some people think it doesn't work, it's not applicable in a sense, per se. Most of the psychology people out there are going to say
from that side.
Yeah. And then you have the Big Five, which is something that I've learned from Jordan Peterson. Can we talk a bit about both of those, and then we'll go into other correlations, like, of course, and put it all together.
All right. So the Myers-Briggs, let's start with that one because it's probably the most popular. Like if you ask the average Joe about the Big Five, they probably wouldn't know about it. But if you say Myers-Briggs, even if they don't know the name, they probably heard the usage, because if, like, say for example, dating apps, that's probably where I think it's gotten the biggest in the mainstream, because they'll put on their profiles, I'm an INJF or whatever it is. So basically with the Myers-Briggs, a little history, it was created by 2 women, I think it was Katie Briggs and I forget her daughter's first name, but hers was Briggs Myers, so she married someone else, so that's why it's called the Myers-Briggs.
Oh, okay.
So basically, they found the work of Carl Jung, and one of his books on personality traits, they pretty much took that and ran with it. Now, we talk about Carl Jung all the time. He's a pioneer in psychology. Him and Freud are basically like the 1 and 2 when it comes to the originators of the psychological field. So he did a lot of work on why do we behave the way we do. He's written literally numerous books on this topic, thousands of like words he took and said, how do we make these words make sense of behavior? So that's what they took. They took that concept and they said, okay, let's take these words and run with it. But the thing was, they weren't trained as psychologists.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really founded on like the same systematic ways how a clinician or a statistician would work, because
they weren't trained psychologists. So what were they?
I'm not even too sure what their occupation was. Like, I think they just were fans of his work, because think about how we look at like Jordan, perfect example, look how we look at Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
That was Freud and Jung, you know, so there's people like us who understand it at a more professional, practical level, but then there's people who like it because it's just interesting and fun, and they're probably more so on that side. Now, not to take away from them, they did do like, I guess, not internships, but like kind of like apprenticeship with people who more in that field. So they try to do their due diligence. So it's not like knocking them, because obviously they did a lot of work to get to the point like 100 years later, you know. So, but not 100, but like 70, 80 years later, they're still doing this. So obviously they did their work, but it's like you have to have that foundation to understand how to make sense of these traits so it can be replicable, because we talk about just getting statistics, that's to be reliable. Can I give you this test again and it shows the same result? Imagine if you did a physical test and every time you did it, it gave a different result. How consistent are your methods, right? It's the same thing with the behavior sciences. You got to be consistent and reliable and valid.
Gotcha. So with that being said, what are some of the questions that they ask on that test?
So basically with them, they take several traits like introvert, extrovert, feeling, sensitive. So basically they're taking each word and you're either one or the other. So this is called a type theory. So a type theory basically is I'm this type of trait that it only explains my behavior. So using extroversion, you're only extroverted. But that's where a lot of the problems come in because you're never only extroverted. So just using it in general sense, if someone says I'm an extrovert, they're gonna run with that and it really doesn't explain every behavior. And that's what personality really is about, is can I explain these behaviors? If I can only use one word, it's not saying much.
Gotcha.
So that's where kind of the problem when the research comes in is we can't have a consistent factor because you can't explain everything from just one framework.
Gotcha. So it's not a lot of variance. There's not a lot of crossover.
And it tends to cater towards more preferable traits.
Yeah.
So it's like a true assessment should, like going back to the physical, I'm gonna use that obviously because I work with you, but imagine a test that only said you're strong. Either not strong or you're strong. No, there's a middle ground.
Black
like,
and white.
yeah, I need to know, okay, I can do 60% of a 1 RM. Now we know where we're at. I can do that 10 times. 50% can do it 20, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So you have to have that like spectrum, and it doesn't really show that, but it's been revised over the years, obviously, and I think over 100 some Fortune 500 companies use it, professional sports team use it.
That's a lot.
They make about $20 million a year off of this test.
Crazy.
So obviously it has some relevance, but I guess that's in anything, not even just psychology, is like what you're testing. If you're looking for it and it shows what you're looking for, then it's doing its job, right? So I don't knock it, is what it is, but in the research field, most psychologists don't really, some see that pseudoscience.
Gotcha. So when I assess an athlete and we're looking at personality traits, but I'm also looking at it more so from a holistic standpoint, I do like the Big Five. I think the Big Five is, for me at least, the most accurate from that perspective, and it has more variance and it allows me to maneuver things where need be and hybrid like some of the aspects of what I see, right? And then also the Braverman's test, just to see where, you know, their neurotransmitter dominance is, and then you can find out the correlation between the two.
That's the point. That's what we want. See, you're doing it the right way. A lot of people, they live and die by it. We talked about that earlier too. It's like you can't live and die by a result, but can they explain things? And that's why it's good to have that ability to extrapolate the data from different aspects versus just this is what it is and that's all that it is. You know.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about it. The Big Five.
So it's called the 5-factor model, but Big Five is the popular term. And there's a little trick to remember them. There's two: oceans or canoe. And now, funny, they both deal with water, but let's go with ocean. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So those are the Big 5 factors. So this is a trait theory. So now we're talking about there's a spectrum. There's not just are you introverted or extroverted now. It's no, where do you fall on that spectrum? Because on this side of extroversion, it'll say if I'm closer to this side, I still can do things, but I feel more comfortable in a less dynamic, less social situation. I'm probably more to myself. I'm more engrossed in like deeper thought process versus like shallower thought processes are more social. Not saying it makes you smart or dumb, but it's more so that person who's on the introvert side probably going to be the one who's reading and learning different things, while the extroverted person gets more pleasure out of being on the scene and socializing.
That makes sense because a lot of people learn differently, right? Everybody learns differently.
The learning style, that's another like kind of theory that kind of got misinterpreted, but we can get into that.
Well, what I was thinking was if you have more on that extroversion side of learning, like the learning process, you like to go to seminars, you like to go to clinics, you like to go to workshops. That's how people learn there, because they can coordinate the understanding with all these different types of people, whereas like the introvert would be in the books.
You know, it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah,
exactly. So,
and that's the same thing when I'm looking with fighters and athletes, is that when I see, you know, are they introverted, extroverted, I can tell if those people will be good in groups or they're good, you know, on their own. And most of the guys, especially in the sport of MMA, because it is an individual sport, they are more introverted than most.
I've seen that firsthand working with you, is like that, but that's why it's good to understand these traits. So if we get back into the want to go over the whole thing, like obviously, so extroversion, I use that because it's probably the most well known. We hear that term all the time, but let's go from the first one. We probably talked about this one the most, surprisingly, but openness to experience. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're you're just like more into the arts or sciences or more intellectual. That's part of it, but it's also having abstract thinking. So that means you can look at things from different perspectives. So if you're high in openness, if I bring to you a new idea, let's use the business standpoint. If you're my boss and you're high in openness and I say, hey sir, I think if I had a new project idea where we can do it this way, blah, 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 blah. You're like, oh yeah, I can see that. For someone who's low on openness to experience, they're probably like, you know what, let's keep it more concrete. They're more like, more rational in their thinking. Not saying they can't be creative, but they're less likely to go with the new idea because it doesn't fit their framework. Yeah, exactly. So someone who's high on that will be more open to different ideas, abstract ideas, the arts, the music. So not saying you can't be open because it doesn't mean you don't want to try new things. It's more so the fact that you approach them from a different perspective and be more willing to see, hey, this could be something I like.
Well, that's an interesting fact because if you look at it, I think that person has to also be willing to let go and allow a person that comes to them with an idea to be open enough to allow them to bring that to the table. Whereas if you have a dictator or someone who is not open or is open but doesn't respect that person,
but then agreeableness will come into there. See, that's cool how they play off each other, right? So then let's not jump the gun. So yeah, so openness, that's pretty much the gist of it. So conscientiousness. So if we talk about, say, in the athletic world, most athletes are going to be high on this. This is a person who's driven. They're somewhat of a perfectionist. They want to structure and organize. It doesn't mean they're necessarily a quote unquote neat freak, but more so they want to have structure to what they do. It's not going to be like fly by the seat of your pants, what happens, happens. This person is going to be like, okay, we're going to work this many days, this many times at this time frame, and we're going to follow through. And if that goal is this, we're going to do that, regardless. That's where the perfectionism comes in.
Diligent, militant, on
prudent.
schedule.
So that's prudent. So so basically, this is big in athletes because obviously you can't become a high profile athlete by skipping practice or not being structured in your goals. Like you can't just say, hey, I want to win. What does that mean? No, I want to get up at 6 a.m., do my running, then 7 a.m. come train with you, 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. doing the jiu-jitsu, whatever it is. Person who wants to succeed has to have that structure to some extent. Like,
and we talked about that where you see a lot of those individuals going into the military.
Definitely.
Right? And those are those ones that like to have that structure. And if they don't have that structure, they feel like it's hard to get through the day.
Oh,
you know, they feel like they're not accomplished in a sense. Now that can go another way. So when you're looking at it from a business standpoint, if I'm an owner, CEO, founder, mostly if you're looking at, let's say, partnerships, right? A true partnership has the ability to play off of each other, right? So if I'm a very open person, right, and I'm a visionary and I'm, creative, then I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna be the creative. Whereas the other person is more managerial, more of the operator. They're more of that conscientious.
Exactly.
So then those two play a role and then they can build upon each other in a parallel fashion.
Yeah, that's why you got a CEO and a COO.
Exactly.
CEO that has to be the person that says, I see 10 years from now, while the CEO is like, hey, we got to make sure day-to-day operation, because if you don't have one or the other, COO, he's going to be the more conscious person, but they don't have the vision. But if you just got a visionary, nothing's going to get done.
Exactly.
And for me and you, we do a lot of like multiple roles, so we definitely got to be conscientious, but we still have to be open. We still got to be extroverted, which I guess is the second one we'll segue into. So obviously we're around people all day, every day, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you can be alone in a room full of people because it's like you're doing a job, but at the same time, you're not necessarily like, I gotta be here, I gotta be hee hee ha ha. Like it's a trade-off. Like obviously you treat your clientele, and so do I, in a systematic way of, playing off of their energy. But at the same time, you might have okay, like I said, when I'm done, I'm just gonna chill, cool down, go about my day. You don't say, let me seek the next activity. Let me go jump on the correct me if I'm wrong. You're gonna want to be like, let me go jump on a Zoom call now. Like you're probably like, yeah, I gotta do a Zoom call. But in the day, that goes back to conscientiousness. You gotta follow through. So that playoff. So extroversion, I like to go on this one because it gets misinterpreted so much. So the biggest thing is you gotta be the life on the party, or you're just in the books doing nothing. And like I said earlier, analogy, I forget who said it. It was a great analogy though. I wish I could quote him on it, but he said that look at it as like currency, right? So if you're introverted, let's use regular American dollars. So let's say you have $100 and every extroverted moment is $5 bill. Okay. So now 20 times you can be extroverted. Now let's say if you're extroverted, you have $10,000. So you have more money to give out. So I love that analogy because it's like, we both can give out money, but eventually I'm like, I need to go chill in the corner for a minute.
For sure.
But you still can go out there and take lead because an extroverted person performs well in social situations.
Yeah.
Going back to sport, MMA fighter, let's use them because we work with a lot of them, they're going to be probably introverted until it is fight night. If they do well, they're able to see those lights, they're able to see the crowd, hear the screams, and say, you know what, it's time. But a person who's lower on that extroversion scale, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, it's time, okay, let's do it. And they're probably going to have to get themselves more prep for it. That's the difference. Cause
You think that as an introvert, you think that is something that is an issue?
Definitely.
Yeah?
Because if you get frustrated, let's go into the cognitive aspect. If your worries and your cognitive load is being utilized for like, I'm nervous, there's 10,000 people looking at me, I hope my team is on my side.
But what if they're able to compartmentalize and just basically focus on the individual in front of them?
Well, that's the beauty of these personality traits, to understand that, because if you as a coach can dictate that to them, or they see themselves, then now they know how to play it. That's the whole beauty of this. Like, if you understand it, you can play it a certain way. So if they do know that,
No, I definitely understand the correlation between being an extrovert, because being an extrovert, you are a showman. So you actually like the crowd, you like the lights, you like the noise, you like all that stuff. But even then, if you're extroverted, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be good as a fighter.
Oh no, definitely not.
Or any athlete, right?
Yeah,
under the lights. I do, but I also see it on the other side. It's like, just because they're introverted doesn't necessarily mean that, all the lights and all that stuff.
Definitely not.
It really is a different factor. But I do see some of the relevancy when it comes down to it, and how both sides have to prepare accordingly. You know what I'm saying? Now, with that being said, let's keep going. So we have extroversion, right? We have openness, we have conscientiousness, we have neuroticism, right?
Well, I see we should say that one for last.
Okay, let's say it for last.
So agreeableness.
Okay.
So we talked about working in teams. So we did one on, I think, type A, right, a few months back.
Yeah.
So agreeableness is a person who is more cooperative. They can take direction. They're less likely to speak up when it's not in their favor. Because think about go to a restaurant with your wife or something. Are you the one who speaks up, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, I'm talking about if the food's bad. I don't know. I'm not that person. I just not if it's bad, but let's say
I probably would.
Let's say the food's not bad, but it was a little bit colder than you wanted. I'm less likely to say something. I'm being agreeable.
To the waiter or the waitress? No, I'll definitely be the one speaking.
Okay, so then, perfect example, so you're less agreeable in that scenario.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of the trait theories, because that's that scenario.
Yeah.
Me
that's because I'm paying for it, though.
Well, I guess
there is some
that's what I'm saying, the trade-off.
That might go, if I'm not paying for it and it's free, or if I'm eating at somebody's house and they're helping, they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. And I'm not gonna be like, this shit sucks. You know what I'm saying? But no, I get. But
that's the beauty of it. And that, go back to my mentor, Dr. Sherman. He studied a specific form of his personality theories is situations. So that goes to that. So in that situation, you said, if I'm at a restaurant, I'm paying X amount per plate. Of course, I'm like, hey, take this back, cook it a little longer.
Yeah.
Versus I know you worked all day and you sweat over a hot stove. You're gonna be like, you could, but so it just depends. But typically, agreeable person is gonna not put up much of a fight. They're gonna be like, okay, it's fine.
Okay, so here we go. So now we go back to man code type shit, right?
Hey. Let's do it.
As a man, right? And whatever, you can block me if you want, say what you say. As a man, for me, if I'm sitting with my wife and I know her food is cold and she doesn't like it, and I paid $100 for that steak, I'm gonna speak up before she does, and I'm gonna speak up on behalf of her, right? But I may not. What if I'm not an agreeable person or something along the lines of that, or an extroverted person where I won't? But I'm going to step up in that particular way because that's my role. That makes sense?
Well, it goes back to the whole default mode. You're probably not as agreeable person. Your default is not to sit there and take it regardless. And then the fact that you have this certain ability, okay, this is my wife. Because some people don't have that. There's some guys who get into the man code, whatever, that would just be like, and then the wife you ain't gonna say nothing. And that's a whole different topic. But that's where this all comes in. And we can even get to how personality traits affect relationships. And that's actually, I don't formally know him. We met via social media, but he's a leader in psychology and romance, and he actually talks about the different traits that may be better for long-term relationships, better for if you're just looking for a one-night stand, better for getting sexually fulfilled, better for cheating, or not better, but more likely to cheat. So there's a lot of correlations there too when it comes to personality traits in the romantic field. So that's a whole other topic. But agreeable people typically gonna work well in groups. They can follow lead. They're less likely, not saying they can't speak up for themselves. Obviously, you're a human, you're gonna do what's right for you, but their default mode is gonna be more like, okay, I'll go with it. That's that type B, right? So that's when the type theories have some relevance, but the difference is we're not saying you're only this or that. That's where the trade-off is.
Okay.
And the last one, I think this is the best for last because I think most people will identify this to some degree because we all have worries, anxiety, but neuroticism, which people don't like that term, they kind of want to call it emotionality now. So if you heard the term emotionality, that's neuroticism now. But basically, this person's going to be high worrier. They're more fearful. Like say the hurricane just came to Florida that didn't really hit us, but it hit the West Coast.
Yeah.
People who are like buying up the store, that's high neurotics because they think.
Bought up all the toilet paper.
For what?
I don't know.
Do you go to the bathroom more because the weather? But
I'm a
perfect
wet
example.
wipe guy myself, you know what I'm saying?
Shameless plug. Are you getting paid to say that?
No, but Dude Wipes, you can sponsor the
Out
podcast,
there.
by the way.
Hey, let's say speak it to existence. But basically, that's them. They're the ones who take a little inch and go a mile with a worry. And as humans, we're wired for negativity for survival. And that's good because in ancient times, if the bush was shaking, I use this analogy all the time, it could have been a saber-toothed tiger ready to jump out and rip you apart. So you're going to like walk the other way. But if it wasn't and you walk the other way, you're good. So neuroticism does help us. But nowadays, there's, like I say, there's no more saber-toothed tigers. So we worry about things that aren't that deep. And someone who's high on neuroticism, they're going to hear something like, hey, the weather is looking bad. And I say, oh my gosh, my day is ruined. And that sounds extreme, but you've probably met people, not necessarily like that, but to some extent of that. Like they hear one negative thing and the whole day is shot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a highly neurotic person.
Yeah.
And you can see in performance and sport, you don't want a guy going into a fight thinking like, but what if I this or what if I that? Why would you put that out there? But this is what they do. They're going to go into that side of the spectrum of like, anything can't, was it Murphy laws? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And that's not how you should be.
Yeah, so highly pessimistic, doesn't really see the outcome in a positive manner in a lot of ways, and lets emotion get the best of them to where they I guess potentially lose because of that. Is there any, I mean, I do see it a lot with fighters because it's a sport that is either you got high reward
or high risk, very high risk.
Yeah, so with that, you do see some of those athletes, and even at the elite level, because we worked with some of those, and there is some level of neuroticism there. But in some cases, it can be beneficial, like you said.
Definitely.
How far is too far?
I guess when there's a part where you're overwhelmed with the thinking of it, that's from the cognitive standpoint. The more we're thinking about it, the less we have room to think about the moment. So everyone say what the buzzword now is be mindful or mindfulness, right? So if you're always thinking in the moment that what if this, what if that, and I guess it could even go the other way with positive thinking, like it's not necessarily neurotic, but you can overwhelm yourself with thinking about the best outcome because you're afraid of the worst outcome. You know what I'm saying? So you're kind of like replacing the negative.
Well, you're fighting, and I'll put it in fighting terms, but you're fighting not to lose as opposed to fighting to win.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that's not beneficial either. So there's something actually called the inverted U hypothesis. Is you familiar with that one?
No.
So in sports psych world, performance psychology, we use this. I think it's still a part of CBT or cognitive behavior therapy. But the goal is upside down U. On this side, low arousal, and for those at home don't laugh, arousal meaning ready to perform. So not in a sexual sense. So on this side of you, low arousal, that means completely not ready to perform. You're just chilling, lax, not thinking at all. Other side, full arousal, that means you're too wired, too ready. This is jumping around, the jitters, overthinking. So they say you should be around this part of that you, because if you're too wired, you're gonna overthink and miss subtle things about your performance.
So the peak of the U.
Yeah, so the peak. If you're on the too far wired, you're gonna miss subtle things about your performance. If you're too low wired, you're gonna miss things because you're not thinking about it enough. So that's that trade-off. Now let's use weight. I like to use fitness because it illustrates it so well. So imagine going for a max squat. So if you go in there here, you're probably gonna fail that rep because you're like, okay,
it's gonna bury you.
Let's go. Let's get it. First, this side, oh man, come on, slapping each other in the face and heavy metal music blasting. Now that may work, don't get me wrong, but it's like you got to find that medium, because from the psychological aspect, you want to be focused still. Because if you're too wired, you might not even be thinking about the form and you get hurt or something like that. So going back to just general life now, same thing. When you're performing a job interview, same thing. If you're too on it, the interviewer is gonna think you're crazy. Like, okay, this guy is too ready for a job. I don't think he's a good one to hire. But if you're like, yeah, I can do that. Cool. He ain't gonna hire you either, because now he's like, you don't give a damn about this job.
I call it controlled aggression. So
Controlled aggression,
in any point, you know, because I fought professionally, I've powerlifted I've got on some heavy weight, right? And at that point, we've done tests on that too as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But at that moment, when the time comes to actually perform, the goal is to make sure that you can hone in on the aggression and allow it to direct towards the outcome, as opposed to letting too much distraction or too much overlay of intensity come about you, and then you lose focus on the actual task at hand.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Or I've had fights where I felt like I was gonna fall asleep in the back. Now, I don't know if that had to do with weight cut issues. That could have been, because it was the same day weigh-ins, things like that. Those play a big factor. But there has been times, and I know fighters that I work with, they've had those issues too as well, where they felt so relaxed, where they actually took a nap before the fight. You know, and then there's in some cases, a lot of fighters used to do that. On one side of the spectrum, you look at GSP, he used to throw up and he'd feel
and that's higher on that
nervous.
He was higher on that U.
Yeah, neurotic, right? But it helped him. And I don't know if that was the ability to take it, and then from this perspective of the U at the end, he was able to bring it up when the time comes. The same thing with Mike Tyson. If you look at what he said, throughout his entire camp, he was neurotic. He felt like this guy was gonna kill him. And then when he stepped into the ring, however, he made the switch, and then he went back up to the peak of that U, where he felt totally in line with what he needed to do.
But that's exactly how it has to be. You have to know. That's why I love this behavioral science and psychology, because everyone looks at it as like it has to be an end all be all, and it's not that. I'll tell you myself, like I've been in the industry as a student since 2007, but as a practitioner since 2012, so 10 years. And it's like people always want to give me that concrete, will this work? And I'll be honest, like call it counterproductive to business, but I'm like, I don't know. But my job, and I always say this to you and anyone else, is can I make it tangible and make you understand how this carries over so you can perform, like you said, when it's needed? Because if you're the man up until the fight and then you fall apart in it, who cares? Or if you're a mess up to the fight and you pull it together right before, I'll take that guy, because at least you knew where to pull it together. And there's nothing wrong with being scared. I think that's another thing with psychology in general, is there's either you don't have it or you do. I hear this all the time. It's 90% mental, 10% physical. I'm like, no, it's all mental and it's all physical. It's just how you utilize it, because I've seen people with the best mindsets fall when it mattered most, and vice versa. People who didn't have the best mindset execute. If you can bring it together when it's needed, that's what I care about. Because at the end of the day, just like with physical performance, you might have struggled in practice all week, but if you happen to do your best the day of the performance, will I like it? No, but let's try to get it more consistent. And that's what this is really about. Learning that personality side will understand you and how you could go about your training, how to go about your life day to day, and that way you can facilitate the behaviors that are going to get you to where you go, versus like, will it get me there? Like, no, let's get the behaviors that will be consistent in that.
Well, self-awareness in general will help you be successful in life, not only in the sport world, but also in business, in your home life, so on and so forth. Like, I think that a lot of people don't spend time on themselves and spend time on knowing themselves, right? So that time in solitude, and maybe taking these tests and understanding it to a degree, but also looking at certain circumstances, sitting back and seeing how you applied some of the attributes that you have, or how you reacted towards a certain situation or circumstance. As you grow older, we're 33, 34 now. I'm about to be 34 in a couple days.
By the time this come out, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, primarily, I'm trying to age myself, I guess. I'm 40 years old. I live half my life, primarily, right?
Statistically speaking, yes.
So with that though, like a lot of things come into play. You go through a lot of issues. You go through a lot of trials and tribulations that allows you to understand who you are in and out. And through that, I believe that is going to take you to the next level. I think at that point, you know, in your 20s, you're kind of trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? You fuck up a lot. Don't get me wrong. You just try shit.
Definitely.
Right? Teenager, you don't even know what's going on.
Exactly.
Right? You just living life. I think, you know, now, and my wife is, I don't want to age my wife, but she's a little older than me, right? But she gives me wisdom. She gives me wisdom on, you know, just life in general, on how she progressed as an individual. Now, the good thing about me and my wife, and we could talk about partnership and marriage and how understanding personalities is definitely a key factor when it comes down to a relationship.
Helped me as well.
Yeah.
Because if you know they're a more neurotic person, try not to push them in the mindset of worrying. If you say one thing that makes her worry, don't say that, because you know how she's gonna get. And I think a lot of guys, I can't speak on girls because I date women, but guys, when we do this, it's like you don't think about it like that's like I think we understand it pretty well given our life, how we came up, but it's like a lot of guys don't understand that. They'll just say, oh, I think it's gonna be, and it just ruins the mood. And it's like, what happened? It's like, nah, understand what type of person she is.
Females are emotional beings. That's absolutely true.
Survival mechanism.
And that's there's nothing wrong with that. And the one thing that I can say, and I'm actually going to do a marriage podcast with my wife. We're going to do it probably for Valentine's Day. But, you know, the one thing that I could say is understanding that individual inside and out. Now, it's not just with a significant other. It could be a business partnership. It could be, you know, if you work with athletes, you work with clients, so on and so forth. So there's always that give and take, and you always have to know who you're dealing with. And so the way you communicate is highly important, but understanding the person from a personality standpoint can give you the opportunity to communicate appropriately.
That's the end goal with all this. This is why they make millions of dollars with these tests, because they want to see if I hire you as CEO or manager, whatever it is, people who have scored XYZ on these traits tend to have better longevity, better conversion, whatever it is. And that's what this shows us. That's really what it's about. So if we can see, okay, this guy has these traits, obviously it's not the end all be all, but it's like you have client A or candidate A, candidate B, and they're showing a high neuroticism. We know a leader can't be high neurotic, but candidate B has low neuroticism. It gives us some guidance. And that's really the big picture is, just like you said, with the relationships, with business, it's to guide us to a certain direction to understand, can this be the best based off of what we know about these traits?
Okay, so we have the temperaments, we have the Myers-Briggs, we have the big five primarily, and then we have the Braverman test where we can see neurotransmitter dominance. Now, all these things, right, you have what's called factory theory, right, or factory analysis. Factory analysis is something that we can basically gather, right, and extrapolate the data and actually put into categories. So when you look at somebody who's highly dopamine dominant, right, that's going to be somebody that's driven, that's a type A mentality, that may be somewhat of a choleric when you're looking at temperaments. It may be somebody
less agreeable,
super less agreeable, somebody who's a leader. And with all these, do you put these together and you say, okay, I could take this, and then now I can bottle this up and find out what's the best way to teach, coach, communicate, whatever the case may be? Is that something that you would do?
Well, actually, I did do that in that study I mentioned earlier. So going with that, you would look at the correlation between each trait and see which one has a direct correlation to the other. So the purpose of that would be is, can I lessen how much I really gotta ask or find out? Because why would you want to do more, right? So it's the opposite, you want to do less. So you would say, okay, we know this correlates with, say, neuroticism correlates with the agreeableness or not agreeable. Wait, I'm messing up now. So you say neuroticism correlates with dopamine dominant, or see, I don't know the Braverman as well as I do.
So if they're neurotic, they would be more of I would say an acetylcholine dominant, because they're analytical. Okay. Right.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So you're highly analytical, you think too much, a lot of times. So you're always asking questions, or always like, okay, what do I need to do,
So the goal thing, I guess with that is, can we make more sense of it depending on which measures? So let's say with the Braverman, like I said, I'm not as familiar with the Braverman, but I know it's more of is it yes, no, or true, false?
It's a true, false.
So that's where sometimes issues with that comes in, because...
Or actually, yes, no.
So it's two, so you ever heard the term, the Likert scale? They call it Likert scale, but it's actually pronounced Likert.
No.
So it's basically, it's when it says 5 points, strongly disagree, Disagree,
Yes, okay,
neutral.
okay.
So that's the Likert scale.
Gotcha.
Everyone calls it Likert, but it's pronounced Likert. That's the name of the guy's name. So, but anyway, so there's only 2 factors there. So true or false.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, it's harder to extrapolate because it can only be one or the other.
True.
So it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, just saying which one can I correlate the most with. So if you can find the correlation with neuroticism and another trait on the Braverman, or another trait with the temperaments, that's fine, because now it says this, it can explain that. That's really what this is about. Can it explain the behavior? So if there's a correlation, now you can just say, okay, I can establish these same measures just with this. So if I know he's conscientious, I know he's this on the Braverman, or I know he's this on the temperament. So that's basically what that would do. You know that they can carry across different dimensions of different tests.
Yeah, and so with the Braverman, especially because you're understanding neurotransmitter dominance, you can also go at it from a nutritional standpoint.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It has this factor, because now you know, okay, if I supplement with the GABA or whatever it may be, I know I can use that because this correlates with neuroticisms or whatever it may be.
Or they have a lack of, if they have a lack of in that
yeah.
diet, that may throw them off a little bit in their performance.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's
why like I said earlier, I'm never big on just it's this or that. It's just a matter of what makes sense and how do you utilize it in an efficient way.
Gotcha. Okay, so now as we're talking about different athletes and stuff like that, how many athletes can you say confidently have you seen or heard or had with you be highly open and extroverted? This podcast is brought to you by Vivo Barefoot. Now check out vivobarefoot.com. That's the minimalistic shoe that I've been rocking on all my videos. If you've been watching my Instagram and YouTube, those are the shoes that I've been wearing to help my foot gain full foot functionality, strengthen up the intrinsic muscles of the feet to allow myself to perform better, and then also reduce the risk of injury. Now I personally like the Geo Racer Knit and the Primus Light 3. Check them out, go to vivobarefoot.com and get the discount code DARU15 to get 15% off your final purchase. All right, now let's get on to the podcast.
So I think I'm in a unique position since what I do is so different and a lot of people haven't really adopted it. So if they are working with me, I say off rip, they have a high openness because you're doing something that ain't conventional.
Exactly.
So off rip, if they're working with me, they definitely have it.
Sure.
Extroversion, I would say 50-50 because I've been in sessions where I know I gotta be a little more outgoing and upbeat because who I'm working with. And they'll even say to me like, you seem a little off just because I'm not matching their level of extrovertedness. And I was like, oh man. And I'll get self-conscious like, dang, I gotta keep up. Then I have others when I feel like, dang, am I doing enough? Like, so it's a balance of sometimes 50-50.
I look at it as like in different sports too, you have different types.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So like we work with high school football kids. They're more open and a lot of them are way extroverted, right? When you look at like, let's say, I'll say high school wrestling, they may be more introverted, right? They're more conscientious because they're more strategic, structured, and they know like, and again, I think that goes into finding out, especially at a younger age when you're looking at the big 3 or the year of 3, I should say, those 3 years where you find out exactly where your child is going to end up, whether it be in sport or wherever they go to, and this is the old Soviet context where they would go in and they would find out, they would have the kids run and do all these things in the gym, right? They would have them do gymnastics, running, wrestling, everything. Within the years of 7 to 10 years old to find out exactly, where they should be at. And this is the Soviet Union. So this is like a little bit, more drastic, but when you look at it, as I'm looking at, children, you can actually see. Now, can we talk about the difference between, the age groups and age ranges and what you need to look at to see exactly what's going to happen down the line from a success standpoint? So like, let's say for instance, ages, 4 to 8. And then from there, you got ages, 9 to 12, 13, getting into teenage years, and then teenage years all the way up to early adulthood.
I think in the early years, it's just about doing, like being active. So
Yeah.
You want to see if the person or the kid is good in groups, because obviously not every kid wants to be amongst other kids, but that's something you can take in early because kids are pretty straightforward with things and they don't sugarcoat too much. So if they don't like something, they'll probably let you know. We both have the same exact age, so we've probably seen that firsthand. I know I have, I'm sure you have. So I guess 4 to 8, just understanding how they interact. So their agreeableness and their extroversion. How do they interact with teachers, coaches, other parents? That's big because at that point, that's their very big, formidable years. I would say after what you said, 8 to 12 or 9 to 12?
Yeah, like 9 to 12, 9 to 13.
So by this point, they're probably more established, like they understand the world a little bit more. They're more conscious to make decisions. Obviously, they're not adult decisions, but they get what's bad.
The gist of what's
they
going
get
on.
what's right. They get what's wrong. So you don't have to spend too much time. Make sure you know how to act when you're out, or you need to talk to Mrs. Johnson this way.
This is when their personality really starts to showcase.
Because they're in a point in life, especially at like the 11, 12 range, talking about middle school.
Yeah.
Now social ability is an actual thing now. Because as kids, most people are just going to play and have fun because you're kids. But once you get to like 11, 12, 13, now you're talking about, am I cool? Am I the jock? Or am I fun? Am I
Yeah, they're trying to
popular?
find their place.
Exactly. And if you're talking about getting to know yourself, I think the terrible teens is so bad because you're in a world where you don't know where you fit in yet. And then you bring in physical aspects. And actually, that's a whole other topic. I don't know if you know this, but they saw it in soccer and hockey that when you were born in the year, predicted the greater success of going pro in those sports. So if you were born later in the cutoff dates, those people tended to be better overall because they tended to be bigger than other athletes. So that's a whole other
That's
factor
me
too.
right there.
So exactly me too, because our birthday is right November 3rd to 20th. So I was always bigger than everyone. So biologically, they catered to me because I was bigger. But then from a social standpoint they gave me more attention. So I thought, I must be the man. So it kind of just facilitates that.
And you were a little bit, well, I mean, I guess that would be more of more personality, but just overall, I guess in a way would be I don't know, you have the ability to understand basic logic because you're a little older at that point.
Yeah, that definitely plays a factor too, because you're not going to be a little kid, even though you're still young, but in the eyes of like kid years, you're like a 50-year-old versus them, they're like still worrying about, let's play, I want to get in the game.
Sure,
Me, I'm like, nah, I'm trying to win. Like, I'm going to go through that person.
I think I always found myself hanging around the older crowd too.
It happened to me too.
Well,
same thing. So,
and I've always been a little bit, I don't want to say wise beyond my years, but there was a reason why my wife is older than me. There's a reason why I was thrusted into a leadership role at the jump when I first started playing football, right? 8, 9 years old, I was a leader, a captain of the team, and I've always been a leader and captain all throughout my life. So, yeah, I mean, I think that does play a role as like you said with the cutoff. Now, get back to that though, because I want to keep going with that.
So who was that? Teen, like early teen, so
teenagers.
9 to 12 on the version. So like I said, that's like where they're finding themselves. But now you got social standards now, because let's be real, all of our kids are 8 years old. Granted, there's probably some of that in elementary school, but most people, and other than like say petty stuff like, oh, your shoes are old, they pretty much don't really get on each other but that. But when you get to like middle school now, it's like, oh, you're a loser, or you're a jock, or you're the pretty girl, or whatever it is. Now you got these social standards that could put more pressure on you. And then let's get to high school, that's where the beast is unleashed. Because now not only do you have those standards, you're in a place where your next move is real life. So I don't know about like when we were younger, we're in that cutoff of like old school, new school. But nowadays there's so much pressure now with finding your place in life, and there's anxiety rates are going up. So I can relate because we're a little bit older, but it's like, that's like way, I guess, harder now, because now you got to find your place in the world amongst trying to fit in your day-to-day. So it's like you're not quite an adult, you're not quite a kid, but you're expected to have these traits. And if we even go back to like, say the 4 or 8-year-old, a lot of people ignore that these are still human beings with different traits, emotions, personalities, and we kind of override that all the way up until high school. So think about when we were kids, like our parents be like, oh, you understand this and hard work, and when you're my age, you understand. It's like, okay, we don't know that because we kids. But I still can get mad about things. I still can be upset. So from a parent to a kid, when it comes to personality and just mindset, it's like, understand that they can have these dispositions too, just like you did. Like if you had a rough day, so can he. It's just like, he don't pay no bills, so you think he don't have no problems, right? Obviously, our kids don't pay bills, but they still
psychological issues that are,
and you gotta take note. Like,
sure.
I ain't gonna lie, I don't miss high school. We talk about this all the time. We never talk about high school. Like, every now and then we might say football stuff, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Pretty much it. I don't even remember.
I can't tell you any of my teachers' names. Maybe two. I have two.
I don't remember what classes I took. I know I got straight A's though. Holla at me.
Hey.
Football.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like that year, I think that's the turmoil, the melancholy, because you don't know who you are, but yet you're expected to be this person in society, but you're only 16. That's a lot.
And your brain isn't fully developed until like what, the age of 25?
So 24, I hear that used so much, especially in like general colloquial ways, and it's like, yes, that's true, but it's like, I don't know. Okay, perfect example. Going back to fitness. If I'm 16, I'm probably not strong as a 30-year-old. But can I still not get stronger and lift heavy? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So going back to that, people use that like, yes, you don't make as good decisions because that prefrontal lobe is your decision-making skills, right?
Yeah. I think
you can't
more in
negate
terms
it,
of like, and I also think that comes into play with like just knowing yourself, right? The maturity role of it. Like you may have a level of maturity that is fit for you. Like as a 16-year-old, you may be as mature as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, but you're still an 18, 19, 20-year-old, right? You're not a 30-year-old, you're not a 40-year-old. You know, you don't have the wisdom of a 50-year-old. So like it's levels. And I think that what I guess I'm saying is that it's not to a certain level of life that you live. I guess at that point, you're not going to understand what life is until you go through certain situations, no matter how mature you are.
That's a definite. You got to. Like, I can agree. We've both been through trials and tribulations. Those helped us be this on top of what we just know. I had to go through that and suffer and struggle to say, dang, I got to overcome this. So you can't take that away too. So definitely.
So as a teenager, what are some of the biggest, I mean, you work with teenagers.
Somewhat.
What are the biggest hurdles?
Well, I was a teacher, so I guess, I taught high school for 2 years, so I guess I can talk about this a little bit.
Well, I mean, I have 2 teenage daughters, 2 stepdaughters.
I see it from, that's a different perspective.
That's a crazy perspective that I see it from, because every time, and I think about it, and I look back, and because it's not that long ago that I was 16, 17 years old, and the level of understanding of life is something that I look back now and I'm like, I had a vision, I had a goal, I've always had goals, I've always had, things that I wanted to accomplish, but my vision was so baseline. It wasn't deep, right? And what I meant by that is like, oh, I just want to go to the NFL, or I want to be a professional athlete, or even just to the point of like, I want people to know and I want to help people. I want people to know who I am and I want to help people, right? It was that baseline knowledge, and when I started to peel back the layers of understanding what life is about, is really when you start to take the steps in the right direction on what you are and who you want to be, and then what's the prime goal here, right? What's your overall passion? What's your purpose? And then you can figure it out from there. But as a teenager, man, it's a rough beat, because not only do you have pressure from parents, but you have pressure from peers, right? So
and now with social media, you got pressure from strangers.
Exactly.
That you never will probably meet.
That they care about even more than their peers, because it's I don't know what it is there, and you can explain a little bit more.
I think we talked about it before. It's called parasocial relationships.
That's right.
So it's basically relationships we form that we don't usually, either we don't know them personally, we know them because they're famous, or just we follow them on social media. So their lives give us this sensation either because we want to be like them, or they do things that just we admire. So we make these connections. This is why you love watching like the Oscars or the Grammys or the whatever awards, because these are people that you've made this relationship with that you've never met. So that's why the term like paramilitary or Paralympics. So they're not real relationships, but they are kind of real, because your brain has formed this bond. That's why Kim Kardashian has 300 million followers on Instagram.
People think that like they actually know.
That's not because, I don't know her, so obviously I can't speak on her personality, but it's like not necessarily just because she's an amazing person, maybe she is, but it's the fact that we think we can relate to her, and same thing with athletes and so forth. So I think there's an upside to it, because it gives us, we looked up the players that we liked, and it gave us that, like, hey, he overcame that, I'm going through something similar. So it's needed, and our brain loves relationships from whether it's face-to-face or now para. You didn't really have that 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, right? So, you kind of had it with celebrities, but it was a major thing.
As you look at celebrities and athletes that are highly successful, And as a fan, and there's a lot of fans out there that live vicariously through the fandom, right? That they see their own self-power personified through that individual. So that's why you have fans. That's why you have people that you root for, right? Or people that you admire. Like for me, you know, growing up, it was probably like, you know, people like Jordan and Kobe and not so and Mike Tyson and all those guys, you know, because they were so successful and so dominant. But with that being said, as you get older, you want to be that person now, right? Where do you find that line, and where do you basically try to separate that perspective?
That's good, because it's like, I think we have an overdose of it now, because like I said, we were born right at the transition. So we grew up when I could wake up every day and see what my favorite celebrity or athlete was doing. I had to read about it or see it on highlights later. Now we see it every day. So now that trade-off, I think, is we admire it to the point where it has to be us, because there's something actually in cognitive psychology, it's a bias called survivorship bias. And I think that messes us up because we only see the ones who made it. We don't really talk about the 20,000 people that go to Hollywood every day who never become Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise. We always talk about the Jordans, the Kobes. We don't talk about John Smith, who got cut junior year. And I think the dose of more so the success has to be balanced with the defeats, and we don't see the defeats. Because when we were younger, we saw people who scrubbed and who weren't good athletes. Now we just see people who win, and it's like we got to have that balance, because survivorship bias kind of skews our perception of a lot of things, right? Like think about like the pyramids, for example, or the Roman ruins. You'll say, man, they were amazing architects, because you still see pyramids, but you don't talk about all the architecture that crumbled. We only saw what survived, and that's a misconception. So we got to really understand, I guess, not just us, but obviously kids coming up, is like, for every success story, we got to know there's non-success stories and find that balance. Because I think the biggest, anxiety-driven factor kids go through is we tell them, you could be anything you want. Put your mind to it. You could be president, lawyer, doctor. And then when they turn 18, nope. Get a 9-to-5, work at retail, whatever it takes, just make your bills. And it's like, wait, but you told me this. And Huberman talks about this a lot with the perception of the outcome and the discrepancy. Because when you talk about like dopamine and the actual neurosciences, now it's like my brain got wired for 18 years to say, I could be anything. So you walk outside, like you think it's gonna be sunshine and rainbows, and it's lightning and storming. And I think that's not even just kids now, I think in life in general, even us. And before, it's like, we didn't fall to it. We just got a different mindset. But a lot of people, our peers, that we went to school with, and it's like they didn't do that because the world lied to us. That discrepancy of outcome and expectation did not meet each other at all.
I say that a lot now with the guys that I mentor in the mentorship, is that don't just learn from my successes. Definitely learn from my failures, because I had a lot of L's, and the reason that I've been casted into this role and been able to be successful was because of those L's, and I learned from them. And if you don't learn from that, then ultimately you're not gonna get above or get over that hump and allow yourself to be that success that you want to be. So learning from the losses, like a cliche term, right? You don't lose, you learn. And it's very true though, at the end of the day, so I think people have to take it in perspective. And the biggest thing is to understand the perspective of it all, that, Jordan got cut from his high school team. Remember that, and the things that he's lost and the games that he's lost, the wins outweigh the losses, but at the end of the day, they learn so much from that as opposed to the wins.
And it's a fun thing you bring that up with Jordan, because I wrote an ebook a few years back called The Thought Book, where I break down different people through history and explain mental toughness and all kinds of psychological things. And I had a chapter where I talked about Jordan. His shooting percentage was in the 40s, which is less than 50. Babe Ruth had one home run for every two strikeouts for every one home run. Terry Bradshaw had just as much interceptions as touchdowns. And the 1968 Maple Leafs in hockey, they had 33, 34, and 1 record, and they won the Stanley Cup. So all those people are legends in sports history, but all their performances would dictate less than successful. But that just goes to the point you made, like, let's look at that. And like you do, I admire that. You talk about your losses. I remember, I think New Year's, you made a whole list of things that you overcame. And a lot of people don't do that. That's why in my field with psychology, I don't mess with a lot of people. I have actually more people outside of psychology that mess with me, because a lot of them, it's not a shot to the industry, but they only preach the happy-go-lucky. And psychology is not about that. It's about understanding behavior, how to manipulate it so you can get better and growing. If you just say, mindset has to be strong and driven, motivated, duh. Like, who would say, hey, go out and suck today? That makes no sense. But it's like, we got to talk about that not being good or being less than adequate. It's just part of the journey. So we got to talk about that too.
All right, so we went through that. I think that's plenty of knowledge for tonight. We'll get back to it. I want to do another episode. Let me know, you guys. Hit me in the comments on the YouTube channel. If you haven't done so, make sure you go ahead and rate the show. If you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, all that, and then also subscribe to the YouTube channel too as well. Follow Nick on Instagram, MrMentalMuscle, and then also Mind Body One. That's the program that he uses to get all the athletes ready to go from a mind-muscle connection standpoint. You like how I said mind-muscle connection, right? Because strength and the mind together.
That man right there.
Thanks again, my brother.
Always.
All right, we're going to keep this thing rolling. Thanks again for watching. See you guys next time.